Why won't she bloom? I mean, honestly, why won't she bloom? I've done everything. I've fertilized, kept it in light, I've watered, I repotted, I did everything that everyone said they should do, but she just doesn't bloom. So in this video, I'm going to go over the reasons that your Phalaenopsis might not be blooming and how to fix that. If you want a quick answer, well, that's kind of easy to get because Phalaenopsis will rebloom on a yearly cycle, which means that first they will put out new roots, then in a couple months they're going to grow new leaves, and in a couple months more they're going to start out with a few little flower spikes. Now, some Phalaenopsis will rebloom on a yearly schedule following that, and others are rebloomers, which means they're going to bloom following this schedule, and they're going to put out a second bloom after the first has all fallen off and died. That's the quick, easy answer. But you know, in orchid care, there's never a quick, easy answer to anything. So let's dive in to see why this Phalaenopsis refuses to bloom. I'm going to answer this question specifically for Phalaenopsis orchids, but please note that there are 73, and depending on the author, 77 species of Phalaenopsis. Now, of these, there are 7 subspecies and 9 natural hybrids. That is a lot of orchids to cover, so I'm going to divide it in just 3 groups. First, the species, which will be natural parents, which have not been manipulated by man, and manipulated, I mean cross-pollinated and, changed and messed with. And the second one will be the hybrids, the ones that you will buy online or from nurseries or from reputable sellers. And the third group is the one we buy in the supermarket, which is probably a no ID, and we just pick it up because we're buying flour or we're buying coffee and, So yeah, that third one is actually what I'm going to be focusing on, because with the other 2, you can either go to my website and I talk about all the species, and not all of them, but at least the 7 or 8 most common ones, which you can read right there. And you can see when it's supposed to bloom. Now, in the second category, which is the hybrids, which you'll buy from a seller, the seller can inform you better of when it should be blooming and when it should not be blooming. Now, for hybrids, which is the second point in this video, there are probably 2 reasons that your orchid Phalaenopsis is not blooming. Now, the first one is temperature. In general, most Phalaenopsis will send out that flower spike when they've had about a month of a drop in temperature, about 10 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius at night. So if your Phalaenopsis hasn't been blooming and you've been fertilizing all year round, then try to drop that indoor temperature at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. For example, if your home environment is about 75, you need to drop that to 65. Or if it's about 23 Celsius, you need to drop that down to about 18 at night. Do this for a month before that year's cycle that you bought it in bloom. If you bought it in August and it was in bloom, then you need to drop that temperature in July so it can sense, oh, this is the time to be sending out that flower spike, and it can really induce in a more natural form to send out that flower spike. The second reason is fertilization. Now, I want to be very clear here, because if you didn't fertilize all year long, adding fertilizer now is not going to make it bloom. The orchid needs that fertilization all year round to build up so where it's healthy, so it can send out that flower spike. If you haven't been fertilizing, it's not a band-aid treatment. So start now, and next year you'll have that beautiful flower spike. So those were the 2 reasons that your hybrid, or the name of your orchid, the species, where it's from, you've got all the data, and it just hasn't been doing right. So those are the 2 reasons. Please be sure to like and comment, or if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell too. I usually put out videos every week on Saturdays. Now on to the next point, which is number 3, which is the no ID Phalaenopsis, which we usually pick up like when our addiction kicks in. So the first one is light. Now this will influence more than fertilizer will. Most people think that just correcting the fertilizer is going to make that spike come out. It won't. Light is really the factor that contributes the most to getting this bloom out. Now don't put this Phalaenopsis in the sun. That's not what I'm saying. Don't get me wrong here. What I want to say is that it has to have the right amount of light for the right period of time, because light is what causes the whole process of converting the photosynthesis to create energy, to get that flower spike out. And if it doesn't have energy, there's no way it's going to put out that flower spike. So make sure that you're giving your Phalaenopsis enough light. Sometimes we're all scared to sunburn your orchids, and I have done that. It happens to us all. But if you keep it in a too dark of a place, it isn't going to bloom. The second reason that it won't bloom is the temperature, which I already cited back there. So remember back to when it was in bloom, have that date written down, and a month before that, start dropping the temperature indoors. Now the third way that orchids can sense this change in their natural environment, so the first one was light, the second one was temperature, the third one is humidity. Now we all know that humidity plays a huge role in orchid care. So if your orchid is not blooming and you've been fertilizing it and you have it in the right light and you did drop the temperature, raise the humidity just a tad bit. Now, most Phalaenopsis orchid sellers will say, oh, this is fine in your indoor climate. Well, sometimes mine won't bloom until I crank that humidity up to around 60%, which is pretty high, especially for my indoor office here. So what happens with these 3 things, which is light, temperature, and humidity? The orchid is going to sense these all changes, these shifts in the natural environment, and they're going to send out that spike. When you grow your orchids indoors, you can change all those 3. Easy. It's outside that's more difficult. So actually, this is the good part of keeping orchids indoors, because you can raise that light. And how you do that, you keep your lights on longer for a longer period of time, or a shorter period of time, depending if your orchid is summer blooming or winter blooming. You have to remember what month it bloomed in. The second is your temperature. You can easily control that indoors. And the third one is humidity. And here's a humidifier, and I added another one up there because my terrarium was way too dry. They sense that. They sense that there's enough humidity there. And the best thing about this is that most orchids will grow in, most orchids, Phalaenopsis, will grow in a tropical climate that has these, not these 4 seasons of the year, but actually 2 seasons of the year, where it's really rainy in one season and it's really dry in another. And when it comes to after these seasons of rain, and it starts to, those first droplets come down, you can actually smell the humidity in the air. The easiest way to do this is actually go to a zoo if they have a tropical habitat, and as soon as you walk in those doors, smell the air. It has that distinct smell of humidity. It has that distinct smell of whoo. And the orchid senses that because it has stomata, and Phalaenopsis will have them, the majority of their stomata on the underside of the leaf. If you have a thinner leaf orchid, it will have their stomata more on the upper side of the leaf. So don't think that the stomata are all on the bottom. They're on the top too. After all is said and done, orchids will have a mind of their own. It's going to do what it's going to do. It does what it wants. And there's really nothing that you can do about it. I do want to add a huge parenthesis here. There is one way that you can induce your orchid to bloom, and that is applying hormones to your orchid. Now, I won't get into this method because I might make a whole video of this later. It's not complicated, but it's not a method I want to encourage you to do right now. Because imagine you're this poor little orchid and you're trying to bloom. You're trying your best to survive, but your owner, you know, they just don't water you right, and they will keep you in a temperature that is just totally off. And then they don't fertilize you, and you're expecting to give a spike, and here they are throwing all this hormone at you, and you're like, okay, I'll bloom, just give me a break. So you see what I'm saying? If your orchid isn't blooming naturally, try to find the cause instead of forcing it to bloom, you know, forcing it to go beyond what it should be doing. If you've done everything right, then I suggest you watch this video on fertilization, because that could be a problem too if you haven't been fertilizing correctly all year long. And so watch that video. And this video down here is another topic that's related to blooming your orchid. In all, I wish you the best in your orchid care and happy cultivating.